The LS engine, one of the most widely used and swapped engines in the aftermarket industry. Now, it has some pros, it has some cons. Let's go ahead and run through them both. So first, I think we're going to start with the pros. So the LS engine has been around for quite a while, and it's been used in everything from sports cars to vans. And you can get these engines pretty much anywhere, at any local junkyard. You can find them online for listings that's super cheap. To get one of these engines, being super cheap is definitely a plus. Now, when I say super cheap, it will depend on what kind of engine you get. If you get an aluminum LS2 or LS3 or something like that, you're going to spend a lot more money. But you can get an iron block variant of this engine in a 5.3, a 6 liter, 4.8 liter. You can find those engines at junkyards for as low as $200. I have a 5.3 that I bought that's going in my race car, and I paid $400 for that, and that came with full accessories, ECU, harness, everything. So price, definitely a pro. You know, if you look in the right places, you can find them for the right price. Now, another pro to the LS engine is that these blocks are very, very strong. Out of the box, you can make quite a bit of horsepower out of these engines, but if you want to make a little bit more, you can go over to an iron block engine because those things love boost. That's why in my own personal race car here, I've gone with a base LM7, which is the 5.3 liter version of the LS, and these iron blocks can handle a ton of horsepower, and that's what we plan on doing with this thing, making a ton of horsepower, because we plan on throwing a ton of boost at it. Another pro to the LS engine and why it's so commonly used in swaps is because of the packaging. Being a pushrod V8 and having the cam in the center and not having overhead cams keeps the heads pretty small and compact, along with the block. The actual size of the engine is very tightly compact, whether it's a 4.8 liter or a 7 liter. So that's one of the big reasons why these engines are so commonly used in swaps, is because they'll fit into almost anything. And what comes with a tightly packaged engine is another pro: weight. With an aluminum block like this, you can actually save quite a bit of weight. The aluminum LS 8-cylinder engine weighs just about the same as like an inline 6.2J or 1J. If you go over to the iron block engine, you're obviously going to pick up a little bit more weight. The iron block is roughly about 100 pounds heavier than the aluminum, but depending on what your budget is and the price difference, what you're setting the car up, it might be worth it just to get an iron block if you're just trying to make raw horsepower. But if you're leaning more towards the aspect of handling and stuff like that, you might want to save a little bit of weight over that front end and go with an aluminum block and spend the money. And one of the biggest pros to the LS engine, in my opinion, is the amount of aftermarket support available for them. There are plenty of companies out there that make aftermarket internals for the engines, from pistons, cranks, rods, cams, valve train stuff. And then there's all the stuff that goes on the outside of the engines, from aftermarket intake manifolds, turbo manifolds like this one, harmonic balancers, oil pans and oiling system parts. Canton Racing actually makes a lot of really good oiling system parts for these engines. Everything down to hardware, bearings, and gaskets even. So there's tons of aftermarket support for these engines, and you can get the parts almost anywhere. And having good aftermarket support for an engine is very important, especially when you're doing something like a race car where you need to get parts and you don't need to wait on stuff being back ordered or custom made. So many people use the LS engine that parts are always readily available from multiple sources, so you can always get the part you need pretty quickly. I know you're thinking, this LS nut swinger's just making these things sound all good, high and dandy. Probably ain't gonna say there's anything wrong with them. Well, no, the LS actually does have a couple downfalls, so we went through the pros, now let's go through the cons. One of the biggest issues with this engine, in my opinion, is some of them are plagued with really bad piston rings. So you will get oil consumption through them, and as it gets worse, you'll start to notice blow-by. You'll have oil getting pushed out of breathers and stuff like that. So especially if you plan on boosting one of these, make sure to adjust your ring gap accordingly, and even change out the rings and maybe upgrade them to some good total seal rings or something like that to help prevent a future issue before it happens. And while we're talking about blow-by and stuff like that, Another issue, well, it's kind of a pro and a con. Pro is that these are skirted blocks, so it does strengthen them, but it does eliminate, you know, being able to use stuff like crank scrapers or anything like that. So you do get a lot of crankcase windage around the crankshaft, and, you know, it does limit what you can do with the windage trays and how effective they actually are. So it doesn't help with the blow-by that, you know, you might be getting in the engine already. Now, one of the pros that we did mention was packaging. Now, that pro is also kind of a con, because it can make it a little bit more difficult to work on if, say, you need to change out your lifters. If you have a lifter go bad, you're going to need to pull the head off to get to it. Not to mention, when these lifters fail, usually they will mess up the lifter board inside the engine, and then you have to send the whole engine out to get remachined. So changing out the lifters can be a real nightmare. Plus, you're running push rods. Now, running push rods in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you cannot rev these engines as high, well, without being like extremely built. You cannot rev them nearly as high as, like, say, a Coyote engine that has dual overhead cams, and it also is going to limit you to 2 valves per cylinder, as where with an overhead cam engine you can have 4 valves per cylinder. Granted, you can put some very large valves in these heads. Another common issue with the LS engine is the factory oil pumps. They do have cavitation issues and are known to fail. I honestly don't even have one here out of all of the LS parts that I have to show you, because I throw them out as soon as I get them, and I replace them with a better high volume oil pump, just because it's something you don't want to have go wrong in your engine, and the ones that come on them are not the greatest. Now, when it comes to doing LS swaps, there's also some pros and cons. The pros are obviously you get a lot of power for dollar. You can do them for cheap if you do them right. They can also be very expensive to do, depending on how deep in you want to go with the swap and build. Transmissions are very expensive if you want to go to a manual transmission. Unless you just want to do like a cheap auto trans, you can find an auto trans from a junkyard for dirt cheap if you're trying to go the cheap route on it. So another big pro and con at the same time is also a lot of people do LS swaps. So the pro to that is that there's tons of write-ups. You know, you can find the write-up on how to do anything you need to do somewhere online. The wiring, routing, power steering pumps, cooling systems, all that stuff is available online. The con is so many people have done it, and it's kind of played out. So, you know, if that's something that you're really concerned with, you know, whatever, do you, I guess. So that pretty much covers most of the pros and cons of the LS engine. And honestly, a lot of the cons, like for the blow-by and windage tray stuff, Canton Racing actually makes some good products to help with that. You know, there's aftermarket oil pumps available to help with that. Piston rings you can obviously change out. So, you know, there are ways to fix a lot of the cons, but when it comes to some stuff like changing lifters out and some of the packaging, stuff like that, I mean, there's really not much you can do, and those are real solid cons. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one though, so like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you're new, you know, maybe you want me to do more videos like this also, I can. Head on over to ShaneWhaleyRacing.com, pick up some merch to help support the channel, and help me get this dumb Mustang finished up so I can go drive it. Links down in the description as always, and until the next one, I'll catch you guys later.